Thank you very much to all of you. And now, Dr. Dietrich, President of the Jury of Niklaus Wirth Award, present the prize.
To introduce Marco Cantù to you, but of course I don't have to introduce him. I think every Pascal programmer will be well aware of him, and perhaps he is the key player in the development of modern object Pascal. Marco Cantù wrote a lot of important books, including Mastering Delphi and Object-Oriented Programming in Delphi, and perhaps everyone among us has his Object Pascal book, and it can be freely downloaded from the Embarcadero websites. I think I don't have to mention the many fields where Marco has contributed to the development of the language, and also to the public relations and to make it known. I always enjoy the tweets on Twitter, if it is about his home in Italy, in the beautiful city of Piacenza, or if it is about Delphi. It is always interesting. So my congratulations. I'm happy that you are the receiver of the award.
Before I start my speech, I want to thank the International Pascal Congress organizer, and Sergio in particular, for the effort to make this event happen. It's a new type of event. I think it's very nice to have these activities that go across the boundaries of a single tool and help the community to meet. I also want to thank the jury who decided to give me this award. And as I wrote, I'm very pleased to be the winner of this award. I have a huge respect for Dr. Wirth and the work he's been doing. I've been involved with the Pascal language for over 30 years, and in this speech I'm going to go over it a bit. So it's going to be a bit of history and a bit of new things. And the other thing that I wrote and I want to mention is that I accept this prize not only for myself, but also for all of the people who've been involved with my work and helped me in my work. And it's really a large community, and I think the prize is partially to the entire community. So the title of this session is A Personal View of History of Pascal and Delphi, and for personal view, I mean how that got intertwined with my life. So I'm going to go through the history a bit, taking my personal perspective. It's not to be as comprehensive as the previous session. It's only what I've used. And at times I couldn't really find a lot of information because it's been too much time. So the first thing is what I started with in terms of programming. Yeah, I know. When the language was introduced in 1970, I was a kid, so sorry, I wasn't there. But the first computer I had access to was ZX Spectrum. It had a wonderful 64K of RAMs, but then Actually, not all of it was useful. It was available because there was 16K was RAM, so the only RAM you could use is 48K. It was a lot for the time, so it was good enough. And on it, I was able to, I think I was using UCSD Pascal. I know I was using Pascal. I'm not certain of it, but it's most likely because there was a version for it. And again, it was the 80 processor. It was a limited computer. And if I remember, that tool was actually not a compiler for Pascal, was an interpreter. It was producing P code, which is, well, Pascal code. It's like the, now we have like a lot of these intermediate language representation for Java it was something in that space. So it was an interpreter. It wasn't that fast in terms of execution, but it was flexible because it was available throughout a lot of different target platforms. The program you could write were faster than the alternative, which was the embedded basic language that this device had. But I was also writing a bit of assembly code because that's where you could really get the speed. Oh, wait. This is not the following page. Oh, okay, it's back and forth, sorry. So that's where I started personally. So I was playing with it. Most of the work there was no internet, of course. So what you had to do, you had to buy a magazine, and then the magazine had listing, and then you had to type everything from the magazine into it. It was insane if you think it about today, what people can do, like using even some artificial intelligence to get ideas for the code. Now, we were typing in something that was printed on paper. Now, as I started attending university, Pascal was the primary language, and it was the first language I used. Too bad it's not the case anymore. It's a great language for learning, but I'll talk about that later again. So the reference book I used, it wasn't much the Wirth language manual, the one showed before, but it was this book. That's my actual copy in Italian, but, well, I also put the English cover. That was a fantastic book, and it was really explaining the concept that you couldn't just have an algorithm, which was like the previous thinking that programming was writing algorithms. The difference was that you had to combine algorithms and data structures, which is actually what we do with objects and many other technologies today. So that was really fundamental. It's considered to be one of the most influential computer science books at the time, but not only at the time, because it really had an impact on everything following it. And it was used extensively in education. Something else was happening around computers in the same years, and it also affected the Pascal language. I'm referring to the fact that it was the time of the computer revolution. The early PCs were starting to appear. I was fortunate enough to have an Olivetti M24, this exact machine, well, kind of. The machine I bought actually had 2 floppy drives, not the hard drive. Only later I updated to a 20 megabyte hard drive, which was quite astonishing, but, well, not for today's sizes. It was an interesting computer. It was faster than the original IBM computer because it was using a different CPU. Olivetti at the time was really a great company. It was running on a modern organization. It was offering what are today like the Silicon Valley benefits style for employees, but that was 30, 40 years ago. So it was really ahead of time, and Olivetti was really a visionary. The reason I'm mentioning this M24 because, well, that's where I was able to run Turbo Pascal. I think it was version 3. I'm not certain about it. But version 3 was one of the most successful versions. And so let me spend a little time on Turbo Pascal, as I think in this audience we owe a lot to it, not just to the Pascal people, but the entire developer community. Again, sorry for describing what's probably a well-known story for many, but I think it's nice to understand what happened back then. In the very, very early days, The hardware vendors would also design the operating system and provide tools for developers. This is what Apple did and other vendors that later disappeared used to do. The only open option was CP/M, operating system, by Gary Kildall's company, Digital Research. IBM did things differently. They were too big of a company to create their own operating system. Each of these pieces would have taken too much time. So they decided to license the software, both the operating system and the programming tools. Microsoft was supposed to provide only the second, only the programming tools, and Digital Research to provide the OS. They ended up throwing it, Microsoft DOS, almost for free into the overall project to save the project. It's a nice story, a bit off topic for today, but the story how Digital Research, or actually Intergalactical Digital Research, that was the real name at the time, missed an appointment with history. So back to the IBM PC, it was launched with programming languages from Microsoft. And you know what? There was BASIC, there was C, and there was Pascal. And I know people are surprised when to associate Microsoft and Pascal, but that was really the case. At the same time, there was a French entrepreneur who had studied math at the Polytechnic of Zurich, not a surprise, and also he had a degree in music. He found someone in Denmark who had written a very fast Pascal compiler for CP/M. It was called Compass Pascal, although different versions had different names. It was a very, very small company. And the company was called Polydata. They were selling it primarily to people in the area. I once talked with a developer who went by bike to Anders' house to get a copy because there was like a new release. So he went there and got a copy of the disc for the new version. So the French guy offers this Danish developer and his company a licensing deal. I'd resell your Pascal compiler. Now, this French guy had no money. So what he ended up doing, he made a bargain with Byte, which was the most renowned computer magazine at the time, to have an ad placed for free. I mean, without paying in advance. He paid it later. And that that was difficult because they would never give you credit for even for a startup, unknown company. And so the French guy only had another decision. He decided to sell the compiler for $50, while all similar tools at the time were over $300. So the Danish developer, and there are interviews about this that gets it in depth, they found out later that the price was going to be $50, and they were going to be paid in royalties. So a percentage of the sales price, they thought they had done the worst business deal in their life. But when this ad was displayed in Byte, Turbo Pascal was an immediate hit. Philippe Kahn, the founder of Borland, had way more money than to repay for the ad. And Anders Heilsberg, who was the original author, moved to from Denmark to Scotts Valley in California to work full-time on the product. And as he wrote, the rest is history. Now, you might be wondering, Microsoft Pascal, what happened to that? It was obscured by the success of Turbo Pascal, and later it was retired. The Microsoft Pascal was an expensive compiler. They offered Quick Pascal to counter Turbo Pascal, the name Quick Pascal, and it was the same price tag, but at that time, it was too little too late, so they ended up retiring it, and not for technical reason, not because there was anything wrong with the language, just because they didn't have enough market. And so a lot of developers were using Pascal, but they were not using Microsoft tools. Now, what was great about Turbo Pascal? The language, of course, we all like it, but it was one of the first integrated development environments. Back then, you'd use an editor to type code, save to a file, run a command line compiler, write down the error number in the output, and then open the editor and move to that error number, and so on, and then compile again. You could run a program at a time in DOS, so you couldn't run the program and keep your editor active and running. So now this IDE allows you to compile and run the program in the debugger without leaving your IDE. It wasn't a separate tool. The ability to have this single tool, compiling, debugging, was really another part of the Great Revolution. It was a huge time saver. And you might be wondering why I'm spending all of this time discussing Turbo Pascal, which is a 40 years piece of software. Well, that's the reason. Turbo Pascal 40th anniversary is coming along this year and towards the end of the year. We have started discussing it in Embarcadero. We want to throw like a big celebration, but like involving the entire Pascal community around it. Turbo Pascal had other peculiarities. It has fast performance. A lot of it was because the code of the compiler itself was in assembly, but also the fact it was a single pass compiler, that helped a lot. There are limitations in a single pass compiler in terms of the syntax you can enable, but they're fast. And some of today's compilers are still single pass compilers. Delphi 11 has a single pass compiler as one of them. And by the way, you can call, if you have a copy of Delphi and you run DCC, you can check, you see the version number of the compiler, that 35, and that 35, 35.0, dates back to Turbo Pascal 1. Oh, okay. No, I was supposed to stay on this line. So Turbo Pascal sold with a no-nonsense book-like license. That was also different. You could install it and use it as a book on multiple devices. It was sold directly via mail orders. Borland sold 25,000 copies of Turbo Pascal in the first 2 years. That's an amazing number for the time. I mean, they were mailed. They were not like downloads from the internet. They were individually mailed to someone and so forth. Borland went ahead creating another tool. That was the second tool. It's worth mentioning, Sidekick. It's, again, something very old that most of you probably haven't heard about. It was called a terminate and stay resident program. It's a program that could stay in memory even when you're running another program. You could run 2 programs at a time. That was unbelievable because otherwise you had to continue switch back your context. So that was a fun thing, but again, I don't want to get into details on what happened there. The reason I want to mention top speed is because I want to get back to Niklaus Wirth and what he did. He didn't remain still after Pascal language and his success in universities, but also in the business world. He went ahead and designed Modular 2. The important thing of Modular 2 is that a lot of the Modular 2 ideas and concepts are in the Turbo Pascal family and in today's Pascal family of compilers. The concept of a unit came from Modular 2. It was not part of the original Pascal language. So the way we structure our application, even today, using the tools that are available today based on units, dates back to Modular 2, not to the original Pascal language. A lot of the ideas of Modular 2 came into Pascal, and in terms of language, there was also Modular 2 Plus, and then Modular 3 with added object-oriented layers. They were not strictly defined by Dr. Wirth, but they were done by companies in the industry research labs, including Olivetti, same company I mentioned earlier. Oddly enough, when I was graduating from university, I did a stage at Olivetti, and they gave me a Modular 3 research paper that was really, just out, because that added another object-oriented layer on top of Pascal. So back to Turbo Pascal and back to myself. I used Turbo Pascal on my Olivetti, as I mentioned, and I kept using it as a language on following computers with different releases. At university, Pascal was my first programming language, and if I remember, my first project was building a graph analysis application to compute the shortest path across multiple points. Kind of Google Maps, but clearly not that powerful. Only the core idea. At university, I ended up looking at other programming languages. I learned C as part of the operating system class. And in advanced computer science, I got exposed to other trends in programming. Object-oriented programming was in its infancy, and with Smalltalk. Functional programming was big with Lisp. Logic programming had Prolog as a driving language. And actually, there was also Borland Turbo Prolog, which was not a big success overall. Of this, Smalltalk was really instrumental to my career. I also studied a bit of Ada, not sure why, but that happened. But interestingly, Ada, which was a language considered big for defense and military, and where you needed to have like a strong security, has a language that has a strong root in Pascal. It uses begin ends. I mean, so it's part of our family. I also learned another fairly obscure language that never took any real, it had any real impact, Eiffel, which premiered some interesting concepts. One of them was contracts. So a class in Eiffel can have invariants, preconditions, and postconditions. Something that's creeping up in some of today's languages a little bit, but it was really unique. Eiffel derived from Ada, and again, it had a syntax that's it's more similar to Pascal than C or curly brace languages. The influence of, in any case, influenced by all of these directions, the Pascal world looked into objects. The name Object Pascal was used by Apple for the language. Borland had Turbo Pascal with objects. It wasn't a huge success, and Turbo Pascal kept declining a bit. You might know that, but the code is still around. You can I mean, the code of the old objects in Turbo Pascal, you can still declare an object type in Delphi. Oddly enough, after so many years, we get bug reports and complaints because it doesn't work well, like with generics, or it doesn't work on mobile. Sorry, I mean, this feature was deprecated 25 years ago, so yeah, it's not working, but it's what it is. Side story, Smalltalk was a nice language, but a bit impractical to use. It had no concept of source code. You just add messages or methods to an existing virtual machine environment, and you couldn't save a program. You could save the environment completely. But there was another interesting player who created a Windows version of it, or kind of a Windows version for it, with significant optimization and architecture, and something I've used. The language was called Actor, and the company was called Whitewater Group, and it was most known for its class library called Object Windows Library that was later acquired by Borland and became one of the tenets of the C++ compilers for Windows. What I ended up focusing at the end of university and at the beginning of my career was, as mentioned earlier, the newly at the time, C++ language. It wasn't easy to find a compiler at first. For my dissertation at university, I used a C++ to C translator, which later could use a C compiler to build the final code. It was ugly, there was no debugging, nothing worked, but anyway. Borland Turbo C++ was released soon after, followed by Microsoft Visual C++, and that made C++ accessible to the PC world. As an aside, even if I was focused on C++, one of my first paid jobs was to translate a Turbo Pascal book from English to Italian. I learned a lot from it in terms of the Pascal language and also in terms of how you write a book. Shortly after, I learned programming in Windows in C, Petzold style, that's what we tend to call it, from the name of the most famous author of the definitive guide of Windows API development, Charles Petzold. Having the ability to use C++ and class libraries was a huge bonus in terms of C. Borland went in full with a sophisticated and extensive class library called Object Windows Library, I just mentioned. Microsoft decided to go with a very thin layer encapsulating the API without leveraging the object structure or adding much to it. Technically, it was much more limited and clearly inferior in terms of capabilities. Guess who won? Visual C++ and MFC are still around, still a very thin layer, still not visual, but it's a popular tool. As I mentioned, I spent a few years focusing primarily on C++ and Object Windows Library, but also on Visual C++ and MFC. At the time, I started attending Borland events, giving sessions. I wrote 3 books on Borland C++ and Object Windows Library. I did training and consulting work, primarily on MFC and the Microsoft toolchain. Until a day in 1984 in San Jose, when I had a meeting with the Turbo C++ product manager to discuss how to improve the library and make it more usable. I was suggesting adding a visual layer to make it easier to build the graphical user interface. He turned me to his colleague Zachary Locker, and I had my first demo of Delphi, which wasn't still called Delphi, by the way. There were different names floating around, from Wasabi, because it was hot, to VBK, for Visual Basic Killer. One of the beta names, Delphi, was suggested by the late Danny Thorpe, because it's the place to talk to the Oracle, given the strong database tie-in. The company planned setting on App Builder. That name is still in the product. The main ID Windows is called T-App Builder. But because it was in use already, they ended up picking Delphi. That was a great decision. The new product was jaw-dropping, by all means. It was the perfect match by that time standard of object-oriented programming components, visual simplicity, good object-oriented architecture, and a massive advance compared to Object Windows Library in terms of a clean mapping and encapsulation of the Windows API and the platform messaging system. It wasn't just an answer to VB. It looked like a huge revolution. Before February 1995 general availability of the product, I left my job, I started my own training and consulting company to focus on Delphi, and landed a contract to write a book on it. Delphi takes us back to Heidelberg. He was not only the author of Turbo Pascal, but he was key to the success of Delphi by designing an object model and language extensions that were and still are fundamental to the success of the language and its ecosystem. This guy is a language genius. Most language gurus design one great programming language in their life. Some end up creating two, generally in the same space. But very few end up being the inventors of three distinct programming languages in different spaces, as Heidelberg did with Delphi, C#, and TypeScript. Not only, but he's also a great and humble human being with very friendly and very accessible. Anyway, this takes us to the February 14, 1995, the day Delphi was officially launched at the Moscone Center in San Francisco as part of the Software Development Conference West. As an aside, that was something we lost over the years in our industry. These days, we have Java 1, Microsoft Build, WWDC from Apple, the Google events, Facebook has a developer conference. Each company has its own, but at the time there were company conferences like the Borland conference, but there were also industry events focused on developers. You could have a conference with Stroop of C++, Guido van Rossum from Python, Microsoft developers, Borland ones, open source communities, and paid tools. They were all together in the same event, and this was fantastic for mind sharing, for discussing, for networking. I had the luck to be not only attending some of these conferences, but even speaking at some of them. And panels were fun. There was real competition among the tool vendors. I mean, a session where each tool was used to build the same program with the respective crowds cheering in the audience. Sorry for the digression. Back to Delphi. The launch event was impressive. The demo left people with no words. Easy building of a Windows UI, exception handling done right, object-oriented programming behind the scenes. The demo program had an access violation, and it handled it by resuming the process rather than crashing. I was lucky enough to be at the event. I remember the party after the launch at the Exploratorium, the original location of the Exploratorium in San Francisco. In case you don't know, that's the first experiment-based science museum ever built, probably in the world, by Frank Oppenheimer, the brother of Robert Oppenheimer, who was also kicked out of university because of his ideas. When it was released, Delphi was, like Turbo Pascal a few years prior, an immediate hit in the industry. The business world was moving from DOS to Windows. Windows 95 was about to be released. Delphi 1 was for Windows 3.1, as you can see. And moving from DOS from DOS interfaces and database-oriented tools like Clipper, Borland DBase, Paradox, and many other to Windows was complex. Delphi had a strong data orientation with database components, the BDE, data-aware controls, a DB grid, and even live data design time, a feature that some of the modern tools fail to provide today, requiring a complex building, deploy, debug cycle to see the user interface populated with data. The other part of the reason was that Delphi compiled code was fast, much faster than database 4GL languages, much faster than the primary competitor, Visual Basic, much faster than the upcoming Java VM, Delphi was fast and was even more appreciated in countries with limited access to hardware due to the cost of the hardware or due to political reasons where they couldn't buy up-to-date hardware. Even today, Delphi remains more successful internationally in places where its performance matters in the early day and probably matters also today. I did mention Java previously for a reason. Java was also launched in 1995. We can consider this year, 1995, the year of programming languages. Java, JavaScript, Ruby, PHP, and Delphi were all launched in that year. Python was already there, but just barely. Now, if you look at the debate surrounding programming languages, JavaScript and Python are considered the new languages. Delphi and Pascal are old languages. How comes? Is it a problem because Delphi hasn't evolved much? Well, I disagree. It had a lot of extensions. My session tomorrow will cover some of them. And what's new in JavaScript over recent years? What's revolutionary in Python 3 compared to Python 2? I read the documentation of the new release. It's a lot of small extensions, primarily in the runtime library and some of the type system. There's not a new language feature in Python 3 compared to Python 2. So what's old in Delphi is the Pascal language, is the RAD model. Oddly enough, there is a lot of adoption by companies like Apple and Google of a rapid application development model where you can see what you're going to get. So it's just something that's floating around in the industry, but there's no real significant ground of touting a language as old or new. There are some new languages, but they're not the languages being massively adopted today. Most of the languages in heavy use today are languages invented in 1995. Getting back to Delphi, the product has continued evolving over the years, had different companies driving it, Borland, CodeGear, Embarcadero, now Idera, had multiple product managers, had many experts as part of its R&D team. I don't want to discuss the company side of things. I'd rather cover what I did and get back to the product and its ecosystem today. The product went over many transformations. Delphi 2 had a 32-bit compiler for Windows 65. The language evolved a lot in the early years. In the Delphi 6 timeframe, there was Kylix, a Linux-hosted IDE for building Linux desktop application. Didn't work out. Later, the company embraced .NET, and again, probably even too much, and created a new IDE called Galileo, which still is the IDE today. As I mentioned earlier, at the time Delphi 1 was released, I created my own training company. At the same time, I started writing books. I also wrote a lot of articles for early magazines, Delphi Informant, the Delphi Magazine, Windows Tech Journal. Real magazine printed and sent by postal mail. Let's start with my books. My first related to the Pascal language was Mastering Delphi 1. I had started with the intention of providing full coverage, not only of the IDE and the language, but also its libraries. It took me a lot of time to write it. It was also complex at the time to work with a US publisher. I was receiving printed drafts by mail, and I marked them and then mailed them back to California. The book took a long to write, but it was a great investment and worth doing. It was mind-blogging. It had almost 1,500 pages, 1,500 pages. It was a huge book. They had to use thin paper because otherwise they couldn't print it. It was successful, but not a hit. Because it took me a lot of time to write it, it was late compared to other Delphi books. But it had positive reviews, a lot of translations, and it was praised by many readers. So as I continued writing Mastering Delphi 2, 3, 4, the books in number kept growing, and the book was a huge hit, specifically in some countries like Brazil. I'm not certain why, but that was the case. Some editions in Brazil sold more than the English edition. Over different editions of Mastering Delphi got translated to over 20 languages. I'm not sure I have the full list. There is a list on my website, but it's old. For a few years, writing books was the most of my time, and also most of my earnings. And the rest of the time was training, consulting, and speaking at conferences. So I wrote Mastering Delphi 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 2005. I wrote also a Delphi Developer's Handbook and a book on Kylix. Then I started self-publishing books. I wrote one on Delphi 2007, 2009, 2010, XE. And then I had 4 editions of my Object Pascal handbook. It's currently in print. That's a total of 16 printed books on the language, although not exclusively on the language. Plus, I contributed to volumes with Carrie Jensen and others. I'm still involved with book writing. I'm planning a new edition of the Pascal handbook, but also it's another project that I haven't really announced so far. I'm involved in updating a very special book called Expert Delphi. It's a book by the late Pavel Glowacki. I decided to put time on it to save the legacy of what Pavel did for the language and the community. The other thing I did over the years was training. I did training and consulting. I did that in Italy, in Europe, around the world. I've given sessions in too many countries to have an actual list. I've given sessions in Australia, Brazil, Canada, Singapore, New Zealand, Japan, the Middle East. In the Middle East, I found Delphi was causing traffic jams. And across most European countries, as north as Norway, as south as Malta, as west as Portugal, as east as Poland, but also Germany, France, UK, Denmark, Sweden, Romania, and of course I did many trips to the US for conferences and events. Let me back to the story of the traffic jam. I think it's funny and it's worth telling. I did a Delphi training session by the Ministry of Finance in Kuwait. Strange Ministry of Finance because the country has no taxes. But anyway, while chatting, the developers told me that there are many people who were upset with one of the Delphi applications. It was causing traffic jams. And I've heard many software problems, but that was a bit strange to have a software causing traffic jams. So it turns out that the large part of the city population, as in many capitals, works for the government. They started working at 8, but employees used to get work sometime after 8, possibly before 9, like a randomly showing up at work. So they introduced badges, and you have to scan the badges entering powered by Delphi. So there was this Delphi application checking the badges. And because they had to get all to the office at the same time, not whenever they wanted, this was causing traffic jams. So traffic jams caused by the program in Pascal. That was fun. One of the relevant activity I did over across training events was the session with Carrie Jensen and his wife Floy. I did it for 3 years, the Delphi Developer Days. That was special. 2 days packed with information, repeated 4 or 5 times around Europe, in the US. We did it for 3 years. It was great, very interactive with the audience, and we also hosted friends and local community members. One of the best events were the early Berlin conferences. I think my hit was giving my fun side of Delphi session in front of an audience of over 5,000 developers. That's a session worth viewing. There are replays on YouTube. It's really fun in person, though. The goal is to do the most useless and insane task in the most complex and difficult ways. It started with a component called T-Nothing, because it does nothing. It went over with a measles app that was infecting the computer, turning the screen upside down, or turning Delphi menus to a much nicer alphabetic order. You can see here. It's quite wild, but the other ideas was exhausting Windows resources. There was a challenge of creating 2,000 windows on Windows 2000. Can you guess the answer? You couldn't. It was breaking, crashing way before that. There was also the time of the Millennium Bug, which we made some fun of. For the younger people in the audience, the Millennium Bug wasn't fun at the time for software developers. We put a lot of effort to make sure the program could work after December 31st, 1999, telling them there was January 1st, 2000, and not January 1st, 1900. Because, most software was using 2 digits for the years, and so that was a problem. Getting back to the Berlin conferences, those events were great. Thousands of people were attending. There was a lot of fun, nights at the amusement parks, late nights with gaming labs. Today, you can feel that atmosphere only in one place in the Delphi world, which is the conference in Brazil. There were a lot of active communities still around the world. There are events in Germany, in Italy, but they have like 100 to 100 people. There are also groups in Japan and Australia, which are very active, and in other countries around the world. Delphi clearly passed its heyday, but the product is still very alive, generating a good business, justifying a solid R&D investment. And the Delphi community is still building software at any kind and any latitude. For a company presentation, I created a list of industries Delphi and therefore Pascal are actively used in. These are not theoretical cases. I could name a company in each of these businesses where they're actively using, and at times that's the main driver for the entire company. So I'm not going to read all of this because it's a very long list. Some of the use cases are fantastic. Pascal compiled code is lighting the Niagara Falls between US and Canada. I've seen applications moving container cranes in automated harbors, some of the largest harbors in the world. I've seen 3D players with showing data about players on sport events on TV live. That's the most relevant TVs in the world are using a Delphi software to show live animations about players, the scores, and all of the information on live TV. There are governments which are getting more tax returns by Delphi application than any other application. So I guess the majority of the tax returns in some countries are driven by Delphi apps. And so the community is great. Third-party vendors and open source communities are doing a great job helping the ecosystem. Some of them are here attending this conference. What was the most successful application built with Object Pascal? In terms of business and industry disruption, I think it's Skype. Microsoft spent billions for it. Spent 8.5 billion basically to buy a Delphi application. They rewrote it after many years and many attempts, so it's not in Delphi anymore, but it's not working much better than it used to be. And then the business has basically gone away. Getting back to myself, slightly over 10 years ago, okay. I got a call from Michael Swindell offering me a job, and what a job. In previous years, I had done some work for Embarcadero in terms of training and even some development. I wrote one of the few components that the company has never released because it was tied to a Windows API that changed at the last minute. It ships with the product, but has never been enabled, and it would be hard to find it. At the time, I was also a reseller of licenses for Embarcadero tools, and so I had some ideas of the business side and of the company operations. I got the offer to become the Delphi product manager and thought about it for a second. It was going to be a big change. I'd mostly been independent in my previous career, and it was a complex time family-wise, but I didn't think too much about it. I realized there was something I wanted to do, so I made a request, they agreed, and in a few weeks I was in Scotts Valley signing a contract, and later I commuted to California about 4 or 5 times a year. Nowadays, these trips are rare. The company is fully distributed online. We never meet. We just meet online all the time. Getting to be a product manager was a big change. Before being a PM for a tool for developers requires being a developer, but also the work is not about writing software, unfortunately. The work of a PM is across all company functions. It helps sales and marketing push the product, but at the same time, evaluating the input of sales and marketing, and customers' input ultimately. It determines new feature plans, but discusses with architects who know what can be done and how. Also, the work is following the development plans, discussing everything from the same and from like how to name a new property to an algorithm, a new component, helping code reviews, testing internally, internal builds and beta builds, long and detailed beta documents, and helping the doc team turn those into the official product documentation, and then working to create a launch deck for a presentation of the product to everyone out there. Over the years in Embarcadero, I have the opportunity to work with some great individuals and developers. The only one I want to mention is David Intestimoni, or David I, who did an incredible job over many years promoting Delphi and Pascal. Of all the great developers I had the pleasure to work with in our R&D team, and many are still working there. There are many others, PMs, people in DevRel, evangelists, but again, I'm not going to name them because I'm going to forget too many. A lot of people are still in their roles, Not only the Delphi community has people who have been working with it for many, many years, but also internally in the company, there are people who stayed in their job for many years, which is kind of rare, specifically for a US company. But of course, I've also enjoyed and appreciated the larger Object Pascal and Delphi community and ecosystem. Differently from the past, when I was just a community member, even if a well-known one, but being a face of the company, I was the target of criticism or what the company did wrong and needed to do. That's natural, it happens. At times it's a bit frustrating, but most of the people do understand your role, and they are supportive, appreciating what can be done to keep the product going on the right track, a small bit at a time. So where is Delphi, and where are its multiple Object Pascal compilers these days? Delphi remains very strong on Windows. I've been in touch with many people at Microsoft. The Windows team appreciate what we are doing to support their evolving platform. I work a lot in this space, from the WebView 2 control integration, the Chromium Edge browser engine that's now part of our libraries, to the MSIX support, just to name a few things I focused on over recent years. Windows remains a core target, but Object Pascal also made inroads on mobile. There are a few successful apps there. Actually, I wrote one that exceeded 250,000 downloads on Google Play Store. Too bad I had to retire it. That's a nice story. I wrote it for fun for my son, and when we published it, for the only reason that there was a way to have his friends install and download it. It was a strange little app. The goal was waiting. So basically, you could click on it once every 30 minutes. Not really very interesting and fun. So I put it up for my son, and it went viral, and with thousands of downloads, and up. We added advertising and even made some money out of it. It was tied to Lego. The company didn't like that, and so I had to drop it. Getting back to the PM work, I've been the longest service Delphi product manager with over 10 years of work in the role, although I'm working with a team, so I'm not the only one, and also have a responsibility for other company products. What did I achieve in this role? It's hard to make a balance. The language probably didn't evolve as much as I wanted, but stability, as I was hoping, but customers value stability and performance a lot. And also, some of the minor features are making a big difference than embracing a new language product, because people then have to rewrite all the code to embrace that new thing. Also, compatibility is a feature for us and a core tenet of the product. So it's also a bit of a hindrance, slowing down new development. There are lots of nice features we added to the language in these last 10 years. I have a session tomorrow covering some of them, so I won't spend my time here. My top one is like inline variables. They look a small syntax change, but the effect is very significant. It's introducing block scope and block-based lifetime for objects. It's introducing type inference in the core language. It was a small change, but a huge one at the same time. There are also features we removed. This is generally a more difficult decision, acknowledging a mistake and making steps to remedy it. Reversing a previous decision, it's hard for the pride of the individuals involved. It's also hard for a company as well, but it's often the best long-term decision for the health of a programming language and its ecosystem. And for example, ARC was one of those things. At times, automatic reference counting. At times, you want to remove what you have decided not to, despite some strong customer, at times, what you remove and what you decide not to do, despite some strong customer push, is important as the new features. I remember the pressure to support Windows UWP and Windows phones. The pressure for Windows phones was gigantic. You need to have Windows Phone or you're dead. Nah, Windows phones are dead. We didn't decide to go that route, and now we are happy we did it because these features are not relevant anymore. But at the time, waiting and not adding the right feature can make you less relevant in the future. It's a hard balance. Delphi never got a good web development story, and this has been a big blowback. In these 10 years of my career, I've been able to keep writing some of the books. The Object Pascal Handbook got new editions. I've been able to keep traveling to meet Pascal developers, keep writing code, also to automate some of the tasks of my job, to design and help defining the architecture of new features, to write demos, and internal documentation. Again, where is Object Pascal today? Has it got any value in this rapidly changing landscape of today's world of artificial intelligence, immersive reality, metaverse, crypto? There isn't an easy, detailed answer to the question, but the short answer is yes. I have another way of putting it. We shouldn't give up to curly-braced languages, which is a definition of all the many programming languages derived by C. They promote short notations over readability. How comes a double ampersand is better than typing and? It's one extra char, it's easier to find in your keyboard, and much easier to read. The Pascal community is not alone asking and recommending readability as a feature. Python is the other big player in this space, and it's not surprised that Pascal developers like Python, and we at Embarcadero are hoping and working on enticing Python developers to move to Pascal and Delphi. Python and Object Pascal have a lot in common. They both started as great languages for learning and teaching, but eventually found a role in the industry. Most universities have given up on teaching good programming to teach languages that can give you a job. I find it a bad idea. Once you know about programming, you can switch languages. But if you only know a language, then you might get stuck on it. Take this practical example. My first class on programming was based on Pascal. No objects, because they didn't exist. Last year, my son's first class on programming at university was a mix of C, to learn the core elements of the syntax, C++ to get objects and how they're managed in memory, and Java, which was simpler and more high level of how objects and classes work. Take any modern Object Pascal compiler. It would have served all three purposes: the foundation of programming, object-oriented programming done right without the complexity of C++, and you could have included generic, exception handling, and core tenets of any programming language with one single language. Will it be possible to reverse this trend in university? Not easy at all, but some developers are starting with Python, and Object Pascal is a good next. So again, what's the strength of the Object Pascal language and its world? I can probably come up with a long list. I can also question some of today's hysteria in finding complex solutions for problems that could be avoided in the first place, and later creating another solution to handle the complexity created by solving the first problem. Take deployment. I'm going to be extreme here, but to better explain myself, I know reality is a bit more complicated. We have customers who build very large applications with up to 20 million lines of code into a single executable file. One single file. You know that an average modern application has thousands of files to deploy and requires complex orchestration tool to deploy the right files in the proper version and get to the proper file to deploy along with the code from a package repository, hoping the developer hasn't deleted the library. You never know. Getting back to Object Pascal virtues, you know them. Fast compilation, native compiled code, which is generating faster and it's more secure. No or very little runtime or deployment dependency. Even Visual C++ requires a runtime to deploy. Of course, you need to have the right version of C++ runtime, so you end up with 10, 12, 15 MVC++ runtimes on any Windows computer. Did I mention fast application and low memory footprint? Also due to the lack of garbage collection. That's another side of it. Pascal is eco-friendly. There is only an old study that gets referenced to this, referenced often these days, but it's actually a bit old, listing Pascal with C as the most ecological language. This is the last point I want to touch because I'm ending this speech. Today, a significant amount of energy is used to power data centers and cloud computers. I saw an estimate that 3% of the global electricity powers cloud systems, and it's growing. Like in the late 90s, countries with less powerful computers, for example, Brazil or Russia, preferred compile Pascal over basic interpreters. The same makes sense today. By using more memory and CPU-efficient program, we could cut energy consumption. And I'm sure you don't want to use C or C++ to write server-side applications. You might want to prefer using Python. but it's not as energy efficient. But if you use Object Pascal, you can use a nice language and an efficient one at the same time. Equally important, we should aim at having better battery life on our cell phones. Maybe using less Java on cell phones would be an idea. The Object Pascal ecosystem is certainly not the only one helping, but more awareness would be important. Similarly, more awareness of the relevance of learning how to program using a good, solid, readable language that promotes good coding style is invaluable. I know I mentioned this already a few times, but we are at a university, so the topic is relevant. Also, we have a great and healthy ecosystem. Take Spring 4D, take Skier for Delphi, take the gaming engines, the threading libraries. For the first time, the server-side components and tooling. For the first time as a company, we are contributing. We are releasing an open source. We have released open source Bolt for Delphi. We recently released Octoid, a header generation tool. More is coming. We think it's important for some old technologies to become open source, to keep them around for those interested. We also created an entire Python ecosystem, making it free to use, a subset of the VCL and FMX to Python developers. That's completely free to use, and offering free Python components to the Delphi developers, so they can use any of the popular Python libraries directly in Object Pascal, including artificial intelligence libraries. And there are crypto libraries available for the Ethereum blockchain. So there's a lot moving, a lot happening. Object Pascal is not dead, and the developers are not standing still. The world is moving fast, but we are here. And let me finish with a quote from one of my recent books. I know it's not great quoting your own words, but I feel it's worth. To conclude, power and simplicity, expressiveness and readability, great for learning and for professional development alike. These are some of the traits of today's Object Pascal. A tool for all trades, with compiler and development tools embracing the mobile era. A language ready for the future, but with solid roots in the past. And that's all I wanted to say. Thanks again for the honor of receiving this prize. I hope this history of Pascal and Delphi in my life helped you learn something new.